I thought I was immortal. I was 25. I had just made the legal drinking age, which matters in places besides New Orleans, I guess. And then I got a head injury playing rugby. Can't imagine how that possibly happened. I woke up 3 days later with a migraine. Now, does anybody here get migraines, suffer from migraines? All right. This is not as good as like the gumbo roux question, right? Okay. Well, they're lousy. And my migraine, it didn't go away. It was strange. I kept thinking it would go away. I kept getting MRIs, but it didn't. And as my senior year continued, I kind of went through all the requisite stages that you're supposed to. I got angry. I got scared. But then somehow I graduated. I, in retrospect, don't know how I did it. I think I just thought that every day was going to be better, it was going to be different. This is me here at my graduation. These are two great women in my life. On the right, my grandmother, who really instilled the love of New Orleans in me. She's the one from New Orleans. She's wondering, why on God's green earth is it so cold somewhere in May right now? That look is saying, why am I not in New Orleans? Right? She's like clicking her heels together. There's no place like Uptown. There's no place like Uptown. All right? You can't see that because it's a photo. But I did graduate and went into the work world. And a year and a half later, I actually, I got better. What I discovered is that I actually emerged a changed person. And in many ways, a better person. Professionally, I said, I'm never, ever going to have a job where I'm not having impact. Life is short, life is precious, and you never know when the other shoe is going to drop, so you better make the most of it when you have it. I know I sound like an Eminem song, but, they're good lyrics, okay? So this is kind of what I'm talking about when I'm talking about not just resilience, but radical resilience. The idea that you can actually come back better than before with cities. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So New Orleans, back in the 60s, it was the queen city of the South. It was the energy capital of America, right? It had a bigger population than Atlanta. It was the gateway to the Americas. This was the Pan American Festival, right? Everybody dressed much better back then. But then something happened. Through a combination, a toxic combination of benign neglect and active malfeasance, we began this inexorable decline. And so Houston became the energy center, and Atlanta took our headquarters, including Delta Airlines. Who knew Delta Airlines is a Louisiana airline? Yeah, the Delta's the Mississippi Delta. We weren't interested, it went to Atlanta, and now you have Atlanta. Well, who here knows that Walt Disney wanted to put Disney World here, right? You know that, Brenda, here in New Orleans, and we weren't interested, so he went to this place in the middle of Florida nobody wanted called Orlando, and he put it there. And that's what happened. And so then if you look at the numbers, you can see that we went through this decline where up until the oil spill, this is job growth for the 4 decades before Katrina, we were all kind of hanging pretty well. But then going forward from that point, places like Austin grew 350%. Places like Tampa and Raleigh, 250%. Our main competition, Atlanta, Houston, grew 200%. The nation grew 80% over that time. And what did we do as a region? That's not a city, it's a region. We underperformed the nation by half for 4 decades. We were the reason that everybody else was above average. But then this happened. And the general feeling about Hurricane Katrina was that this was the sad but inevitable end to a once great city. But then something remarkable happened on September 25th. We rebuilt the dome. Steve Gleason, who's a hero off the field, blocked the kick. And at that moment, when we went on to beat Atlanta, there were grown people crying in the stands, not just because we beat Atlanta, and not just because we knew at that point that the Saints were going to be back, but we knew at that point that New Orleans was going to be back, and then something even greater. New Orleans didn't just come back.
Okay.
We got crunk, and we came back better than ever. Better than ever. And the Saints won the first Super Bowl ever, and we came back better than ever. And that's what we're talking about with radical resilience. It's not just bottoming out, right? We all have our bottom outs, and then coming back to where you were before. That's resilience, and that's very important. But can you use the moment of trial as an opportunity for transcendence? And that's what radical resilience is really about. We got a new brand. The Federal Reserve stopped calling us the Big Easy and called us the Big Busy. Their headline, by the way, a radical reset of the economy. So they're using the word radical. Companies chose Louisiana, Greater New Orleans, and New Orleans that never would have even considered us before. GE Capital, GE, the fourth biggest company in the world, looked at 47 locations around the world for their IT center of excellence and decided on New Orleans. This chart has us as the number 2 aspirational city in America. What does that mean? It means that we are the city where people aspire to live based on our economy, based on our quality of life, based on our demographics. And let's be real, people. On August 28, 2005, we wouldn't have been anywhere on this list. People like to visit New Orleans. People did not aspire to be New Orleans. So the fact is now, post-Katrina, through our transcendence, we're number 2. This is what I mean by radical resilience. I want to go through a few reasons why this happened. Now, before I get into this, I think there's a few things that we have to recognize. The first thing is that, most importantly, it is our spirit. It is the Cajun heritage. We dance at funerals, all right? We are tough, tough people, okay? Most people don't do that. The second point to make is one that was referred to earlier, and that is that we will have ended up receiving about $140 billion as a result of the storm and all the public, private, philanthropic payments that come in afterwards. That's a lot of money. When places in California and Arizona and Florida, the homes had their mortgages underwater and they were suffering under the housing asset bubble burst, our homes were underwater. We totally missed the housing asset bubble burst because we didn't have homes. How's that for some strange, ironic economics? But that's what happened. But then there's some other things that we did right. Effort plus engagement. It was the business community, it was the civic community, it was the nonprofit community, it was the faith-based community. Everybody got engaged. Then the Hornets, this is a great story. There was a clause in the Hornets contract that said if they didn't hit 17,500 fans, they could leave the city. It was a poison pill. But the business community got together and we sold more tickets per capita than anybody in North America, so much so that David Stern started going around and saying to other cities, why can't you be more like New Orleans? And we kept the Hornets. Now they're the Pelicans. Still not the Jazz, but we're working on that one, okay? And that's what happens with effort plus engagement. The second thing is that we embrace the new. New Orleans was never a place that embraced what was new and fresh. But if you think about, Katrina forced us into accepting things new. It broke up old paradigms, right? And necessity is the mother of invention. Then Katrina was the biggest and baddest mama of them all. And all the way across the spectrum, whether it's education reform, where we are now the reform model for the country, and we're going to be the first urban school system with no failing schools. Or it's Entrepreneur Week, which is becoming the Mardi Gras of ideas. Or the fact that we lead the nation by 64% in startups per capita, right? Or the fact that we are number 1 for attracting young people with college degrees. All this means that the new New Orleans, the one that has transcended, now embraces and celebrates the new. Common theme, opportunity from adversity. The Macondo oil spill is going to give us the down payment on restoring our coast. We've started a whole new economic sector, emerging environmental, saying that we can be the Dutch of North America, that we can not only restore our coast and save ourselves, but we can create jobs. Hurricane Sandy up in New York. Right now, companies from southern Louisiana have $400 million worth of contracts in New York and in New Jersey helping them rebuild, right? A group came to see us from Iraq. They came to see us because they wanted our advice on how to restore the Garden of Eden. Mesopotamia, at the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, is in southern Iraq. And it so happens that Saddam Hussein, to punish some of the tribes down there when he was in power, he basically dammed up the rivers and he turned the Garden of Eden, the birthplace of civilization, into a parking lot. And now they're trying to restore it, and they see New Orleans as a place with the best expertise in the world. The power of coalitions. We used to be a very parochial place. I remember visiting my grandmother growing up here, and there was like a one zip code rule. That was all you were allowed to travel, right? If you had to go to get, if you had to go to make groceries, right? And, going across the lake, that was like going on, you had to leave a first of kin, get a pass. But what we saw with Katrina is that water and people don't respect political boundaries, and so we have to work together. So first, the southern shore, New Orleans, Jefferson, St. Bernard, started working together on flood protection. Then we had the region, G&O Inc., where we started working together to compete against Houston. Then we realized that actually, if we draw the boundary bigger, because that's about the size of Houston, basically, all right? I mean, seriously, like Lake Charles is the Woodlands and like Belle Chase is downtown. I'm sorry, no offense to Lake Charles. That we could start hanging together. And then we saw that even at a national scale, when it came to national flood insurance, that little old New Orleans, greater New Orleans, we could form a coalition across 35 states, across 250 organizations, and cause the least productive Congress in recent history, and a president that was against us, to sign a bill that was going to save southern Louisiana and the rest of the country from misguided flood insurance. Okay, we discovered that coalitions can cause the small to be very, very powerful. Finally, we changed our mindset. We went from thinking that we were competing against Mississippi, or that it was really good to be the Southern average, or that it was funny to be at the top of the bad lists. And once we started winning, and I would argue that it was really the rebuilding of the dome and the Saints that got that idea going that we could be winners and not ain'ts, we started getting accolades that would never have been thought possible on August 28, 2005, let alone in the destructive aftermath. Number one for wins, number one for business conditions, number one for tech growth in the country, number one for economic potential. Okay, this is stuff that never would have been possible before, and all of these things happened as a result. And then, let me just name this. There was a level of leadership that we saw at every level, to the degree that it wasn't just the people who you saw on stage here today, but every citizen, whether they were an elected official, a self-appointed official, or they were a person on the street, took responsibility, personal responsibility for one item and stuck with it until they made it better. When I was leaving New York City, I sat down with my boss, and the look he gave me, I'll never forget it. He just kind of sat there and crossed his arms and looked at me, and it was the look I think you give your child when they walk in with a face piercing for the first time. It was kind of this look that's like, you're a fool and I can't save you. And I asked him for some advice. And first he said something not very nice about our home. And so I said, how about one nice bon mot before I leave? And he just looked at me and he tossed off, remember, Michael, that one person can make a difference. And I thought that was basically a, please get out of my office now statement, right? But what I've come to realize is that it's all of these one people and all of you in the room and everybody who's actually made the difference here. And this is really how we've transcended, is the accepting of responsibility and the follow-through. Which brings me back to my grandmothers. My father's mother, 15 years after this picture, when she was 90, had a stroke. And she was on her deathbed in the hospital, and it was pretty clear that we were going to lose her. When I got there, she could no longer speak. And she asked for a piece of paper. She gestured for a pen, and all I could find was a red pen from the nurse. And I gave it to her, and she wrote that first line. And I couldn't read it. And she looked at me with her eyes, and she was an impatient person all the time, and now she was extremely impatient, right? And she took the pen and she wrote it again. And I realized what she wrote. She summed up her entire life, 90 years, in 3 short words. A for effort. Then she took the pen again and wrote underneath it, and don't forget to vote. That's true. And those were her final words that she left me to take into eternity. And I think that really is our call to action for all of us, is to continue to have a full effort, continue to stay engaged. Because if we do that, then the vision for the future of New Orleans is very, very exciting. It is a New Orleans with an economy that is diverse and that's supporting a middle class. It's an economy with an education system that's giving opportunity to everyone. It's a place that's reconnected to the world as once again a global destination. It's a place with world-class assets supporting commerce and community. It's a place with wetlands and coasts that are making the next 300 years sustainable. It is a place that has a quality of life that provides safety and opportunity for everyone. 10 years ago, in the aftermath of the greatest man-made disaster in American history, when people said that we should bulldoze our homes, who would have thought that New Orleans was going to be the greatest comeback of the 21st century? Who would have thought that the editor of Forbes would have called us the economic turnaround of our lifetimes? This is radical resilience. This is New Orleans.
Work it harder, make it better, do it faster, makes us stronger, more than ever. After our work is never over. Work it harder, make it better, do it